Every time someone loses money on a real estate deal, it's because they ignored one or both of these formulas. If you can master them, you will never lose money on a deal. I understand that's a bold claim, but if you stick with me for this entire video, you will understand that if you can understand and master both of these formulas, whether you're looking to flip a deal or keep a deal as a rental with the BRRRR strategy, you will never lose money if you do these the right way. Real estate investors rarely lose money on a deal because of the market or because of a bad contractor. They lose money on a deal because they underwrote it improperly and put in bad numbers into these formulas. When I got started investing, I didn't have these formulas, and I made money on some deals and didn't make money on others. I just tried to buy as deeply as I could when I was looking at a deal I was going to buy, and then I just tried to keep the rehab as minimal as possible when I was trying to flip the property. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but with these two deals, it will work every time. According to BiggerPockets, 72% of failed flips or failed rentals are due to running bad numbers, not due to the strategy. The first formula I want to talk about is the MAO formula, or max allowable offer formula. This is a formula that you use on every single deal you're looking to buy, whether you're keeping it as a rental or whether you're planning to take it down and flip it, or even if you're looking to wholesale it, you need to understand and maximize this formula. The second formula I'm going to show you pertains more to rental properties, but we'll get there when we get there. So the formula is ARV times 75% minus your repairs and your costs. I'm going to break down each of these three sections and tell you how to maximize them so that you actually underwrite a deal the right way so you won't lose money on it. All right, ARV stands for after repair value. This is you calculating what the property is going to be worth after it's repaired or after it's fixed up. There's some art and there's some science here, and definitely lean on a real estate agent if you know one that has access to the MLS and that is used to running ARVs or comps. The best way to do it is the 3-3-3 rule. I made it up. I don't think it's a thing. Let's go over it. So what you need to do is you need to find 3 houses that are similar to the house that you're wanting to buy within 1/3 of a mile that have sold in the past 3 months. You need to find active, recently sold houses. That is what the bank's going to do. That is what a future buyer is going to do. So you need to do what they do. You need to find 3-bed, 2-bath houses that are in similar condition to what yours will be once it's fixed up, that are within 1/3 of a mile of the property that you're looking to buy, that have sold in the past 3 months. You can't look at a 4-bed, 2-bath, 2,000 square foot, 2-story and say it's going to be the same as your 3-2 range. So find 3 of these houses that have sold very, very recently. Now, this is not always easy in most areas, especially rural areas. So what you do is you start here and do what you can to find these 3 properties so you can get an actual ARV. And if you can't, start to extend out the parameters. You always have to find 3. That doesn't change. But instead of going out 1/3 of a mile, maybe go out 1/2 of a mile or 3/4 of a mile to widen your net, and maybe go back 6 months instead of 3 months. Now, the biggest thing is you got to keep this as tight and as closely sold as possible to make it the best type of comp for you to use, because if you find 3 of them within 1/2 a mile that have sold in the past 3 months, by the time you buy it, fix it up, and either sell it or take it to a bank, this comp will be maybe 6, 8, 9 months old, which is okay. They need to be under a year. But if you find a comp that's 10 months old right now and the project takes you 6 months, a 16-month-old comp is not going to work. So this definitely takes some practice as much as you can, and lean on real estate agents that are good at finding ARVs and comps. Then you multiply that number by 75%. And what this is doing is building in your profit margin. I'm going to go over an example here in a little bit to explain how you can go from 70 to 75 to 80% and the risks that are involved in changing those two numbers. But what's going on here is you are building in a 25% gross profit margin based on the future value. This is very important for you wanting to make a profit as a flip, and for you needing enough equity to be able to do a refinance in the BRRRR method. So we will go over that in the example, but just know the lower this number, the more your profit is. And then the last one, and this is the one that people get wrong the most, is your repairs and holding costs part of the formula. Most people just plug in a rehab number and they leave it there. There's a lot more that needs to be included. You need to include all of your holding costs. You need to include the utilities that are going to be paid as you're managing the rehab. You need to include the real estate taxes that you're going to have to pay when you either sell it or keep it as a rental. You need to include the insurance you're going to have on the property. And lastly, and what is missed most, is you need to include your money costs in this number. If you're borrowing money from a private lender or a hard money lender, you need to include the interest costs into this number. And then also obviously include your repairs and your rehab costs. If you're able to surmise that all properly and get that number in here and you're right on your ARV, then you're not going to lose money. Obviously the ARV can change as the market changes. It doesn't change overnight, by the way. Don't let people tell you that. And obviously your rehab can be off a little bit. So in order to negate both of those things, you have to be as conservative as possible here and as conservative as possible here. I'm going to go over a quick example, then we'll move on to formula number 2. But if you ran an ARV and got to a number, or a real estate agent ran it for you, and you find 3 houses that may be sold for $315K, $310K, and $305K, most people would say, I'm going to put 310 as my ARV. I say, be conservative and put $300,000 as your ARV. The point is you're building in the market potentially shifting and coming down, and if it goes up, you're only going to make more money. So make sure you are being conservative on your ARV. That will allow you to make mistakes and still make a profit. And over here, make sure you are adding some fluff into your numbers. You can do it however you want. You can add a little bit of fluff to each line item in your rehab budget, or if you want, just add 10 or 15% to the end of the numbers. So let's say this property needs $40,000 in repairs and it's got $10,000 in holding costs. So you have $50K in this number. Well, I would just change that to $60K. So you get my point. If you are conservative here and conservative here, a lot can go wrong because some stuff will go wrong, and you can still be profitable and you can still make a really, really good deal. Now let's show you some real numbers and then we'll get on to formula number 2. So let's say you ran the numbers that I just showed you, and the property will be worth conservatively $300,000 once it's fixed up. You multiply that by 75%, and then as I told you earlier, the property needed 50, but you put 60 in there to be conservative, and you put 60K into this number. So 300,000 times 75% is 225,000. Then you subtract out your 60,000. So you take 225 minus 60, and that gives you $165,000. So that is your max allowable offer with conservative numbers. Now, obviously, if you put this number higher and this number lower, your offer may come into 185 or a little bit higher. Now, you may get the deal if you offer 185 over 165, but that lowers your margin for error. The more conservative you are, the lower your offer, the more deals you miss out on, but the deals that you do buy, you will be guaranteed, or hopefully guaranteed, to make at least a little bit, if not a lot of bit of profit. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the 75% does. Let's do some simple math, and then we're going to move on to formula number 2. So let's say for simple math, the property is worth $100,000. You multiply it by 70% minus 15K in repairs. So 100,000 times 70% is 70K, minus 15K is 55K. So that's your max allowable offer there. Let's say you multiply this times 75% minus the exact same numbers. That's going to be 100,000 times 75%. 75,000 minus 15 is 60K. And then last but not least, I would never go above 80%. People did go above 80% back in the COVID days because everything was going you bought it at 100K ARV and you ended up at 120 because the market was so hot. But as you can see, 100,000 times 80% is 80,000, minus 65 or minus 15 is 65,000. So as you can see, the higher your percentage, the more your offer, and you'll get more deals, but again, your profit goes down. Want to make sure you're sure of that. So if you're conservative throughout the formula and you get good at the art and science of figuring out ARVs and understanding what around a rehab budget will be with some built-in fluff, there's no reason you should lose money on very many, if any, deals. All right, formula number 2 is the cash flow formula. This one is if you're wanting to look at a property, use the max allowable offer formula to know if there's going to be enough equity, and you decide to keep it as a rental rental, make sure you run this cash flow formula before you close on the property. If you're not keeping it as a rental and the other numbers work out, great, don't worry about this. But if you want to keep it as a rental, and I suggest you running both formulas on most properties you buy, just so you know if there's an exit strategy there or not, this is what you use. And the formula is rent minus expenses. And I like this formula because this one is a lot more known than the max allowable offer formula. The earlier one we just went over, the MAO formula, has a lot of different variables that can make it not work out. In fact, it's probably not very often, if ever, going to work out how you think it's going to work out. Hopefully sometimes for the better if you're conservative. However, this one you need to make sure it works out, and every variable is known. So let's go over each variable. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find the future rent of the property. This is similar to finding the ARV of the house, except it should be a little bit easier. Go to Rentometer or go to Zillow and look for properties that are for rent. If we're buying this 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot ranch, just go find some 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot ranches in the general vicinity. It doesn't have to be within a quarter or a third of a mile, that are in good condition, and go with what they rent for. The Zestimate on Zillow is decently accurate, but it's not something you should 100% go off of. So you should have a known rental amount and what you're going to ask. You can be a little conservative here, but this is a little bit more black and white. So you take the rent and then you minus out these 7 major expenses, and at the end of the day there's at least a few $100 left over. This should cash flow because all your expenses are pretty well known, and if you want to keep it as a rental and cash flow and have a good investment, you can. All right, let's go over the 7 expenses. The first major one is going to be your mortgage. Now this one I guess you won't know exactly because you won't know exactly how much you're going to have in the property, but you're generally going to know what your purchase price is, plus your holding costs, and plus your actual rehab costs. And you should be able to plug that number into a mortgage calculator. Even if you're a little bit off, you're running a 20, 25, or 30-year mortgage, even being off a few grand is not going to add up to that much every single month. So get a pretty well-known mortgage. Then you subtract out your real estate taxes. Again, this is a known number. You can go to Zillow and look at what they paid in real estate taxes, ownership property taxes the prior year, or go to the county or city website and find out what the real estate taxes that were paid the prior year. They're going to be the same. Most places every 2-year adjust, but they're going to be very, very similar. And let's say they paid $2,400 in taxes at the end of the prior year. You put in $2,400 divided by 12 monthly, 200 into this number, and that's what you're going to pay in real estate taxes. The next thing you subtract out is the insurance. This one is for sure a known number. Just talk to insurance agents and insurance brokers in the area and get quotes on what your house is going to be and plug that number in. That one's pretty simple. The next expense to account for is property management. This one, you just take a percentage of the rent. You could be managing the property yourself and not put this in there. I still suggest putting this in there in case you do end up hiring out the property management, but most places are going to be 8 to 10% of rent. So if it is a $2,000 a month rent, you set aside 10% of that, or maybe 8% of that, so $160 to $200 a month for property management. The next expense to account for is maintenance. You are rehabbing a property, so maintenance should be minimal, but we suggest setting aside, based on real numbers, about $150 every single month for maintenance. Hopefully you won't use it every single month, but maybe 6, 7, 8 months down the line, you haven't had a maintenance call and a water heater goes out or something happens to the property that you have to spend maybe several $100s on. If you've been setting $150 aside every single month for the past 6 months, you'll have $900 in a maintenance account that can hopefully take care of that item. The next is vacancy. Your property is not going to be rented for the entire life of you owning it, most likely. Hopefully you get a tenant in place and they are there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years maybe. However, when the tenant moves out, whether it's after 1 year, 2 year, or 5 years, you're going to have all these expenses to pay, but you're not collecting rent. So we set aside 5% of rent. So this is that $2,000 a month rent. We will set $100 or 5% of that aside every single month and let that grow. Hopefully our tenant stays there for 3 or 4 years. So we have $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in the vacancy part of the account that we can tap into when the tenant leaves for minor repairs and taking care of the mortgage and taxes until we get the property reoccupied. So the longer the tenant stays, potentially there's more repairs to be made. If you have a good lease, they're going to be taking care of those on the lease, or you can take some of their money, take their deposit, and do those repairs. But in general, you have money aside mainly to take care of some of these fixed expenses that you're going to have when you're not collecting rent. And then lastly is CapEx or capital expenditures. This one depends on the property type, how old it is, and how much money and big expenses you may have coming up. But I would set aside at least 5%, maybe 10% of a CapEx fund in case the roof fails or in case you need to replace the HVAC or something, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7,000. That cost, you can have money set aside for that, aside from the vacancy. This is more for maintenance and covering these expenses. This is more for if a tenant's maybe still in the property and something happens major, you have money set aside for that. But the thing is, if you're utilizing the BRRRR method like all of my community members do, you're going to have a freshly rehabbed property. If the roof needs replacing, you replace it upon the actual rehab. If the HVAC is old, you replace it among the actual rehab. You shouldn't have any major expenses for several years, but you need to start to account for it now. And as you can see, if you take the rent minus all these expenses, and in my opinion, have $200 plus left over, net after all these expenses, and the max allowable offer formula worked, you just bought a rental that you're very likely to be able to buy using none of your own money because there's enough equity there for the refinance, and then after it's rented, you have all your expenses taken care of with the rent. I know that can be a lot, but I promise you it gets easier as you do it. Just like anything else, the more you practice and the more effort you put in, the more you'll understand this and the better you'll do. If you learned anything or appreciate me spending some time going over these formulas with you, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Check out the description for some more freebies like a chance to schedule a call with my team, like a free rehab calculator, free training, and even some funding sources. So check that out, hit that like button, and I will see you on the next one.